Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're very pleased to be hosting Yaakov Katz, a U.S.-born Israeli journalist who's here to talk about his new book, While Israel Slept, How Hamas Surprised the Most Powerful Military in the Middle East. Yaakov has years of experience covering military issues, and for 7 years, from 2016 to 2023, he served as editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. He currently writes for Newsweek and the Jewish Chronicle and is a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. He also hosts the Jewish People's Podcast, which explores issues facing the global Jewish community. His previous 3 books have been on the conflict between Israel and Iran, Israel's transformation into a high-tech military power, and Israel's secret mission to eliminate Syrian nuclear power. In the spring of 2023, Yaakov teamed up with another journalist, Amir Bohbot, intending initially to write a book about the history of Israeli efforts to create a precision strike capability. But then the October 7 attacks by Hamas occurred, and the authors shifted to focus on that seminal catastrophe. As the authors say at the start of their book, the Hamas attacks were like nothing Israel had seen before and involved atrocities that Jews thought, since the establishment of Israel, could no longer be perpetrated against the country. More than 1,200 were killed, including the most Jews killed in a single day since the Holocaust, and another 251 people were taken hostage by Hamas. And now, nearly 2 years later, the death toll in Gaza has surpassed 64,000 Palestinians killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. Yaakov and Amir explore not only questions of how did Israeli intelligence fail to detect warning signs? How did Israeli forces along the border and other defenses fail to stop the attacks quickly enough? But also questions of why. Why did this happen? Why had Israel been lulled into complacency, believing Hamas could be contained and was interested more in a long-term truce and economic stability than war? To answer these questions, the authors look back at the history of Hamas and at an Israel that grew overconfident and came to view Hamas as weak and deterred. The toughest question, though, that Yaakov and Amir say they encountered in working on the book is not how or why October 7th happened, but how Israel can ensure such a tragedy doesn't happen again. To that end, the authors offer recommendations that address such matters as intelligence reform, improved public diplomacy, a strategy for exiting war, and bolstered U.S.-Israeli relations. There's certainly much to discuss here this evening, and guiding the conversation will be another Israeli journalist, Barak Ravid, who reports for Axios. He's also the author of the 2023 book, Trump's Peace, about the Abraham Accords and the reshaping of the Middle East. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Yaakov and Barak.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Yaakov. First, thank you for inviting me to host this conversation. We've known each other for a long time, and when we were still, I think, traveling on the traveling press with, I think it was even when the Prime Minister of Israel was not Benjamin Netanyahu, believe it or not. There was
a period.
Exactly. And when the Prime Minister was Ehud Olmert with the Second Lebanon War and all the other things that happened at the time, and it was, and I don't know how many of you know, but for Yaakov, this is obviously the most exciting thing of the week, but there's something small that he's also doing this week. I don't know if you know, he's also the co-chairman of the MEAD conference, the Middle East America Dialogue, that starts tomorrow here in Washington, D.C., which I have to tell you is going to be, it's the second year, and this thing is going to be huge in the next few years because I was there last year. I'm there this year. The program is amazing, and I think Yaakov, what you're doing for anybody who's interested in this issue is quite remarkable. And I wanted to start about the whole decision to write this book, because as you just heard, it's your fourth book and your second book with Amir Bohbot. And when you made the decision to go for writing this book, and I know it personally because it's for if you haven't done it before, it's like the decision to write is the big moment. So what made you why did you make the decision to say, okay, we want to write a book about that?
Well, thank you very much. Let me thank Politics and Prose for hosting us and all of you for coming. And let me thank you, Barak, who really is today, and we have known each other for a long time, and often wrote on different publications and competed for similar stories. But really today is the leading reporter on everything that has to do with Middle East and America. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come here. I mean, writing a book is always going to be complicated and always difficult. And I felt long throughout my career of spending about 25 years now in journalism and writing thousands of articles, and you've probably written thousands, if not more yourself, is that some stories do need to be told in a different way and do need to be told in a broader context because you need to go deep on things. And for me, it's always been this just drive from within, that a feeling that this has to be done. In this specific instance, back in the spring of 2023, just when I stepped down as editor-in-chief of the newspaper, because like often happens to editors, we get burned out. And I knew I wanted to write a new book, and Amir and I had written a book a few years ago, came out in 2017, called Weapon Wizards, which told the story of how Israel developed some of the most sophisticated military technology, Iron Dome, which many people know about, which missile defense, and so much more. And we felt that there was a sequel to be done. We signed a book deal with our publisher, St. Martin's Press, started working on the book, and then comes October 7th. And of course, that book was no longer relevant, and we pivoted, and St. Martin's Press came along with us for the journey. And I do have to say, to their credit, that this is a very controversial issue, as I think everybody knows. And we do come at it with as much objectivity as we can, but we also are Israeli journalists, and we're coming at it from a perspective as Israeli journalists. And so we don't shy away from who we are. We don't hide who we are. But we do tackle what went wrong, how did it happen, and we don't spare anyone criticism in the book, from the government all the way down to the lower level commanders in the military. And I have to say that I think it's a challenge today for some people to write books about these topics because of how controversial it has become. So I do give St. Martin's Press credit for stepping up and being willing to do it.
And you mentioned the previous books that were on Iran and on Syria and on technology, and the three previous books, the point of view was, let's focus on something that was an achievement, that
Right.
went well, that succeeded. Here, it's the first time you write a book about a failure.
Yeah.
How different is that as from a point of view of an author?
Well, I'll tell you even more than that. I mean, you're writing a book at a time that the war is also continuing, right? And at a time that both Amir and I have daughters in the military. My oldest daughter just finished up her military service on Wednesday of last week. After 3 years,
Mazel tov.
thank you. She was an officer for about two of those years. And on October 7th, I drove her back to the bus that was taking her back to base. And she wasn't a combat soldier. or officer. But there is something when you're driving your child off to war, essentially. So it was very real for us, and we're part of the traumatized Israeli people. And I think that that's an important point, because with all the controversy and all the criticism we could have potentially of Israel, the Israeli people today are still very much hurting and very much traumatized by what had happened. And this isn't to take away from any other pain and suffering that is there. There is plenty, especially in Gaza. But this is the fact of the reality of what's happening today as this conflict does continue. So it's much more difficult to write a book as the war does carry on. It's more difficult to write a book when you're involved to an extent, right? You know this, Barak. There's not a single, I think, Israeli family that doesn't know someone who was killed on October 7th, doesn't know someone who was taken hostage on October 7th. In my little family, I have 4 children. I can't even, I probably lost track of the number of people my kids know who unfortunately have been killed, whether it's October 7th or throughout the war now, whether it's a husband of a teacher in their school, whether it's friends from their youth group, people from the community, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was an American-Israeli hostage. We went to the same synagogue as he did as a kid. And Elkanah Bohbot, no relation to Amir, who's still being held in Gaza. I knew him when he was almost 20 years ago, because him and my brother served in the same elite infantry unit in the IDF. We used to joke that Elkanah had become more of a brother to my brother than I was a brother, because that often happens, that camaraderie in the military. So that was difficult, but also gave a sense of real purpose, that we had to write this book because Israel has to learn the lessons. And you know this as well as I do, and I'm sure that you support the establishment of a commission of inquiry, because that is existential for Israel, to learn how did this happen? Where did we go wrong on so many different levels, so we can study and learn to prevent this from happening in the future. And I don't venture to believe that what we did is the replacement of a commission of inquiry, but it is an attempt to get that conversation going, and we believe that is very, very important.
Yeah, just to give you some context, in Israel today, I think when you ask people in polls whether they support a national commission of inquiry, you get, I think, 80% of the people support it, and I'm not even sure that 20% oppose. It's even less than that. But the government at the moment, the Netanyahu government, refuses to establish such a committee of inquiry. Now, because I'm coming from Axios, tell me about, give me in smart brevity, the 3 main takeaways of why it matters, why the book matters.
Well, I think it matters because of what we just spoke about before, of the importance of learning the lessons and implementing them so that it does not happen again. So that's the big thing that has me most focused. But I think it also matters because it's a tale that I think talks about something that happens, strategic surprises. And how can a country, even as powerful as Israel, how can it prepare for a strategic surprise if it were to happen? And then, of course, also is the fact that Israelis, and this might sound strange to some people, but Israelis, for the most part, at least is my impression, I'm curious what you think, Israelis view themselves as Westerners. I think we are. We're a liberal democracy. The Israeli people consume American and European media, culture, trade is with the EU, the United States. We do trade with the East, with China and India. We don't watch the Bollywood or whatever it's called, the Indian TV and film. We're part of the West. If you were to ask Israelis, are you part of the West? 90+% would probably say we're Westerners. We're part of the OECD. We're a developed country. And with that mindset, what I think Israelis yearn for at the core basic foundation is quiet, is peace and quiet. It's like when the Abraham Accords, what you wrote a book on, when it was reached, what was it, 500,000 Israelis in the span of a year flew off to Dubai because here's finally an Arab country that's willing to accept us. So they flock there, right? That's what Israelis ultimately want. And therefore, the possibility that sometime down the road we'll have quiet once again. And it will be a quiet that might be tense, but things will be quiet on the Gaza front. Things will be quiet on the Lebanese front. And there will be some target that's moving. Someone's moving a rocket. Someone's digging a tunnel. Someone's doing something on the other side. Does Israel attack, or does it stop? Does it just write down where the target is? Does it go back to a policy of containment? And that's something I think we can no longer afford. I think that's the dramatic change that comes from October 7th, which we still have yet to fully internalize in Israel and I think around the world. We cannot go back to a policy of containment where we say, okay, we know what they're doing, but we have a big wall, or we have the Iron Dome to swat rockets out of the sky like mosquitoes. That will no longer be possible because we now know what could happen.
And explain to me, I think one of the main questions that I think every Israeli or even every person around the world who has been following this war for the last 2 years, and I myself asked the same question. How is the military that failed so miserably on October 7th and the Israeli intelligence services that failed so miserably on October 7th are the same military and intelligence services that in 12 days significantly damaged the Iranian nuclear program and their missile program, bombed a week ago a meeting of all the Houthi rebel leadership in Yemen, okay, more than 1,000 miles away, did the beeper operation and the walkie-talkie operation, and basically destroyed Hezbollah almost completely. How is it the same military and the same intelligence service?
It's an amazing question, and it's really mind-boggling because you see what Israel's capable of doing, and you don't understand how is it that they were able to do these amazing things, and here they failed.
Because it's the same people. Okay,
it's the same exact people. I think it is this policy of containment, I think has 3 legs to it. And really, just before that, it comes down to a very simple answer. It's a question of priority. When I prioritize correctly and I view the threats as I do, I have the resources and I put them there. But when I believed, for example, that Hamas was contained, was not the threat that it turned out to be, then I did not put the resources. So for Israel, when they looked at the threat matrix in the region, Iran number 1, Hezbollah number 2, and close to number 1 because of the great missile arsenal it had amassed over the years. So Israel put all those amazing resources, right? They had spies on the ground. I mean, in Gaza, you got to ask yourself, right? Ultimately, on October 7th, about 3,000 people crossed into Israel. Now, about half of them in the end turned out to be pillagers, regular people, not regular people, but people who crossed in and pillaged, and some of them murdered and some of them raped, but they came in. They weren't the Nukhba Hamas terrorists. But you had hundreds who came in that initial wave. Not one was an informant. Not one had been recruited by the Israeli military. When Iran, we were able to take out the entire Iranian military leadership and scientific nuclear leadership. So we had people on the ground who knew where they were. Here we didn't have one person who could say, hey, we're coming, get ready. And we then discover that Israel had completely neglected human intelligence in Gaza. We had become infatuated with with SIGINT, with signal intelligence, with electronic digital and intelligence collection, visual intelligence collection. We thought when we heard everything they were saying to one another, we knew what they meant to do. And clearly, we did not.
By the way, some of the initial investigations that were done showed that even signals intelligence in Gaza was neglected partially. So even the thing that the IDF was basing it, the Israeli intelligence was basing itself on, was also neglected.
100%. And this containment policy that you can, which I call a fairy tale to some extent, that you can live alongside a genocidal terrorist group that says they want to kill you and you can contain it, it was based on three legs. The first is technology. Iron Dome. Their missiles are not a problem. We can blow them out of the sky. They don't force us into conflict. We don't have to respond. They fire a missile, we go on with our lives. Amazing system, but creates that sense of security. In 2014, in one of the operations, Hamas started popping out of tunnels inside Israel in the summer of 2014. Operation Protective Edge, it was called. Israel realized it had a problem, so what does it do? Builds an underground wall, calls it the Iron Wall. So the wall goes down all the way underground, blocks the tunnels. They also create teams of scientists and engineers, sonar experts who they take from the submarine fleet, seismic experts, geologists, construction guys. They build a system still highly classified that can tell you when they're digging a tunnel, where the location of the tunnel is, and so sensitive it can even tell to some extent what tool is being used to dig that tunnel. How many people crossed into Israel on October 7th through tunnels? 0. So we had technology that created a sense of security that our border was impenetrable. It was. The second leg to the containment is, I think, the bigger fish to fry, which we mentioned. We have Iran, we have Hezbollah, here we have technology. We have to prioritize. The third leg is a little more controversial because it wades into political waters, but I think this was Benjamin Netanyahu and his political strategy of basically when the Palestinian people are divided and you have Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, not that he wanted this invasion, God forbid, but having them divided, and let's put aside politics for a moment, whether we support a two-state solution, we're against a two-state solution. Personally, I've long been a proponent of a two-state solution, but it doesn't matter. For him, I think, in this case, Hamas in Gaza was something of an asset in his efforts to torpedo and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, which comes from an ideological motivation. He believes he's against it. You've reported millions of times about this. So I think that this situation, those three pieces together, made Israel believe it's not the end of the world that they're there. Let it continue.
And maybe even more, I think the overall assumption of, I think, obviously Netanyahu, and he was the prime minister for 90% of the time since Israel disengaged from Gaza in 2006, 2005, sorry. Basically, that you can manage the conflict.
Right.
That you don't need to solve the conflict, you can just manage it. Okay? And this is something that I think Netanyahu believed, or still believes. Naftali Bennett, who was prime minister for a year, also believed. Even called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict a shrapnel in the ass. So it's nothing that,
It wasn't just a shrapnel in the rear end. It was a shrapnel in the rear end that sometimes it flares up depending on the weather.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
in other words, it's there, you live with it, you're stuck with it. And based on weather, in cold weather, it hurts.
Yeah.
In hot weather, it doesn't bother you. In other words, like Barak is saying, it's there, it's an issue, but do we really have to do surgery to take care of it?
And even, even people who are, in the center of the political map, like Benny Gantz, and almost any Israeli politician, and even I think the majority of Israelis will say, well, for years said we'll manage the conflict.
Yeah.
So maybe that was also part of it.
I think 100%. I think also Netanyahu, we remember in 2009 when he returned as prime minister and he beat Tzipi Livni, who was running at the head of a party called Kadima. Ehud Olmert had stepped down due to the investigations against him. Netanyahu promised he would topple Hamas, but he comes into office and he does exactly the opposite. I think for a time maybe he believed it was possible, but then he goes into the beginning. This is where I think the policy of containment started to incubate. We have that operation in 08-09 as the elections are being held. He's campaigning. The operation does not end with Hamas fallen. He then has an operation in 2012. He then has the operation in 2014. I think that shifted things in his mind. He has to come up with a different way of doing things. And by the way, one of those managing of the conflict pieces was the Qatari money. Netanyahu in 2018 gets the Amir of Qatar to begin sending every month a suitcase of cash, $30 million, to Hamas in Gaza.
A real suitcase.
Literally a suitcase with $100 bills. Yeah. Every month, $30 million go in. Now, it's purportedly this money is supposed to go to needy Palestinian people. So people who are identified as being poor, some get $100, some get $200, but every month the suitcases go in. And Yahya Sinwar, the architect and leader of Hamas and the architect of October 7th, is believed in as saying, listen, I need the money for economic prosperity. I'm focused on economic growth. So the money continues. But I tell you this story because you mentioned Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett comes into office in the summer of 2021 after forming a coalition known as the Change Government and promises no more suitcases of cash because it's very controversial. How is Israel facilitating cash going to a terrorist organization? So they do this whole process, and we tell the story in the book, of what are they going to do? How are they going to get the money to Gaza? And they have a meeting in the prime minister's office after going through this whole planning process, and they talk about how they're going to make direct deposits in bank accounts. So instead of the money going in cash, direct deposits. And sitting there is a two-star general who's his military advisor, the National Security Council chief, his foreign policy advisor, other people. And he's got this young spokesman, remember Matan, who's sitting there, 25-year-old kid. And they're talking, and Matan raises his hand at some point and says, I served in the civil administration, which is the military unit that liaises with the Palestinians in Gaza. They don't have bank accounts. Right? There is no direct deposit. Some do, but the vast majority, it's a cash economy. What are you guys talking about? And to make a long story short, of course, that plan got thrown away. So what did they do? The Qataris gave the money to the UN. The UN deposited in the Arab Bank, and the Arab Bank printed what you could call gift cards, loaded, or debit cards loaded with $100 or $200. So it was the same thing. But he was able to say, we're not giving suitcases of cash, but you're still giving Hamas $30 million. So as Barak said, the policy of maintaining the conflict was across the board, no matter where you were on the political spectrum.
And, Netanyahu, who refused to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority for almost a decade now. I think the last time that he negotiated with the Palestinian president was maybe 2013. He did negotiate with Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, including Yahya Sinwar sending him letters and written messages on Post-its. Yahya Sinwar sent Netanyahu a Post-it with written calculated risk in Hebrew. So how do you explain that Netanyahu refuses to negotiate with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who's obviously not a member of Likud or of the Zionist movement, but he's not, a genocidal maniac. And on the other hand, Netanyahu negotiates with the genocidal maniac.
And let's just add to the question how as Israel is allowing these suitcases of cash into Gaza from the Qataris, at the same time they're lobbying here in the United States for Congress to pass a bill called the Taylor Force Act, named for a U.S. Marine or Army Ranger who had been stabbed on the Tel Aviv beach by a Palestinian terrorist, and basically to deduct from the U.S. annual aid to the Palestinians the amount that they pay in salaries to Palestinian terrorists who are in Israeli jails. So they continue, it's called pay for slave. They continue to pay these salaries. So Israel is actively working to take away that money from the Palestinian Authority, which is, as you said, this is terrible to pay for slave, but they're not genocidal maniacs. They're not encouraging terrorism. They're not fighting Israel on the streets, and Hamas is. And I think that this has to do with something that Netanyahu never said, but his finance minister in the current government, who comes from the farther right party called the Religious Zionist Party, Bezalel Smotrich, said a number of years ago, it slipped maybe in an interview, Hamas is an asset. Not that God forbid, again, no one wanted this to happen. From a political perspective, if your ideology is the greater Israel, if you are bent against a Palestinian independent state for whatever reason, then having Hamas in Gaza, in control of Gaza, was the best excuse. Because when Barack Obama would pressure Netanyahu could say, what are you talking about, Mr. President? What two-state solution? They don't even get along themselves. And the truth is that in January of 2006, after the Israeli pull-out from Gaza, there were elections held. Hamas won. And in the summer of 2007, Hamas kicked Fatah out of Gaza. So Hamas was the de facto leader and was not letting Fatah back in. So the argument stood, but shouldn't we have worked harder to undermine and weaken them as opposed to doing exactly that to the person who we're supposed to be negotiating the long-term resolution to this conflict with? I would think so.
I want to go back a bit to the Israeli intelligence services, and especially the Mossad, because at least in my opinion, the Mossad sort of managed to stay out of the of the failure, and sort of portray itself as, October 7th, we had nothing to do with it. It's like, we're dealing with Iran, with Hezbollah. We had nothing to do with it. It's the Shin Bet, it's the military intelligence. But when you look at all the things that were exposed after October 7th, you saw that Hamas was actually quite coordinated, or at least tried to coordinate, even if the actual attack was not coordinated. But over the last few years, it had a coalition, an operational coalition with Iran's Quds Force and with Hezbollah and with other actors in the region that were under the responsibility of the Mossad. And the Mossad still knew nothing about it.
And also what you're touching on has created a lot of tension, as you know, between the leader of the Mossad and his counterparts, the now no longer in their positions, but the former chief of staff who was there on October 7th and the former head of the Shin Bet, who was also in his role. Both have stepped down over the last few months. And that created a lot of tension between that trio, because the head of the Mossad kind of took the standoffish position as if it wasn't me, it was you guys, and I was okay. And I think you're 100% right. The reality is that we now know, definitely after October 7th, I don't know that we knew this before, but Yahya Sinwar had tried to coordinate this with Hezbollah, had tried to coordinate this with Iran, had people, his leadership is in Doha, right? I mean, that would be a Mossad target for collection, not a Shin Bet or military intelligence target for collection. There were messages that were passed on. Didn't talk about the date of exactly the timing. We think in Israeli intelligence thinks that Sinwar jumped the gun a bit because he wanted to steal the glory. What Israeli intelligence also believes is that one of the reasons that some of the reasons why Sinwar decided to attack, one was because he wanted, if you remember where we were in October of 2023, it seemed that normalization with Saudi Arabia might be around the corner. And this was a great way to torpedo that, and it has been dealt a severe blow, and that process has been set back. He saw an opportunity because the Israeli people were distracted with the judicial reform that was running through the country, and people were being ripped apart. There were massive protests, and we made ourselves vulnerable and exposed. But I also think, and I've heard this from intelligence officials, he thought that there was daylight between Israel and the United States, and he didn't believe that America under President Biden would stand the way it did behind Israel and with Israel in the beginning, definitely, of the war, and I would say for the most part of the Biden administration's final year and a half in office. And Biden did, and not only gave Israel the means that it needed to prosecute the war, but also made a historic wartime visit to Israel just about 10 days or so after the October 7th attack. But to the Mossad, it's hard for me to explain and give you a real clear answer why it is that they were kind of let off the hook. I'm curious what you think. It could, Netanyahu tends to enjoy and like the Mossad more than the military, let's say. They are under his authority and responsibility. So it could be that has something to do with it. But you are 100% right that Dadi Barnea, the head of the Mossad, Dadi Barnea has been able to kind of shift blame away from himself.
This is not, it's not covered in the book, but let's talk about what happened since October 7th. And obviously, I think it's clear to everybody today that Hamas is not capable, at least right now, to conduct another such attack. And because of the IDF operations against it, but we also saw over the last 2 years that the Israeli response was, I think, the most ruthless and brutal than any other war Israel had since its founding, with has been mentioned here before, 64,000 Palestinians killed. According to the IDF, if I take the IDF numbers, it's 15,000 are militants, which means that around 50,000 are non-combatants. And this thing is going on and on and on. And there have been numerous cases of mass civilian casualties in IDF bombing in Gaza, with what at least to me look like mass war crimes. Is this something that the IDF just lost control, or is this something that, as I think former military intelligence chief Aaron Khaliva said, it was recorded and it was aired a few weeks ago, that he said, we need to do it like that so that they'll remember for generations not to do it to us.
It's a tough question. And I think that, this war is a terrible war. And what has happened to the Gaza Strip is a great tragedy. What's happened to Israel is a great tragedy as well. But we cannot ignore the devastation and the destruction that has fallen over Gaza. The number of civilians that have been killed. I'm not sure. I always question the numbers, but we can't ignore exactly how many. It is a huge number, because the Gaza Health Ministry is the Hamas Health Ministry. And I think that if we do have intellectual honesty and integrity, nobody in this country would ever quote the Al-Qaeda Health Ministry after 9/11, or the ISIS Health Ministry during the siege on Mosul in 2017. But I put that aside. That's, we're not here to argue in that sense. I think that the war has advanced the way it has for a couple of reasons. First of all, there were elements within, the blow to Israel, as was mentioned in the introduction, the day that the most Jews were murdered on a single day since the Holocaust, was so horrific for Israel. The images so literally burned into Israeli conscience that there was a need to fight back aggressively. Whether the war was pushed upon us, and it doesn't make a difference. There was that need to fight back in a very harsh and aggressive way. Did it get out of hand at some point? Are there some commanders who might have gone too far and might have been motivated also by a sense of revenge that they felt? Sadly, I think it is possible. And I think that is something. So did they get out of hand? Did the military not rein them in enough? I don't know. And that's part of the reason why I think that a lot of this still has to be investigated, not just the events of October 7th, but also how we got to this point in time. I also think that we can't ignore the fact that this is also what Hamas wanted. And that's an important part of the story. Hamas doesn't care about the people of the Gaza Strip. I kind of think about it, if only they cared as much as we cared for so many years, up until this war, that we were so surgical in the way we attacked, that we decided to, I mean, you know, you mentioned Naftali Bennett, but Yair Lapid, when he was the prime minister just for a few months, he oversaw that Operation Breaking Dawn, which was just against Islamic Jihad. And they took pride in the fact that Hamas is out. They're not interested because they're deterred. They were playing with us. But we were always trying to be so surgical, to just take out the bad guy and minimize collateral damage. And Hamas took advantage of that. And they embedded themselves in the way that they did in the civilian infrastructure. The tunnels that they dug under people's homes that still crisscross Gaza. I mean, they're now saying maybe 2 years almost into this war, Israel has destroyed how much? 50%? 60% of the tunnels? 30% of the tunnels? We're still talking about hundreds of miles. Just 2 weeks ago, the IDF discovered another 2-kilometer long tunnel somewhere in Khan Yunis in the south, with strategic tunnel, they called it. I mean, we're 2 years into this. We're only now discovering that tunnel. But they dug these tunnels underneath. They didn't let the people of Gaza into them when the Israeli bombings happened, because they weren't for them. The people above ground are meant to protect the people below ground. The people above ground are meant to be sacrificed on behalf of the people of Hamas. And they do this and do it in this way because they want the world to turn on Israel. And I'll just say, has Israel made a lot of mistakes? Yes, it has. But I think it's also a question of blame, or a question of responsibility. And I think that to the large part, the responsibility rests on Hamas.
No, but maybe this is Yahya Sinwar's biggest victory.
Yes.
That he got the Jewish state and the Jewish people into a situation where they can kill tens of thousands of people and don't care.
I don't want to say, Barak, I don't think it's fair to say no one cares. I think Israelis care. I think that Israelis, it's hard for them to see the pain of others right now because of the pain that they still feel. It's hard to feel the empathy for the people of Gaza who are suffering when Israelis feel that they're suffering. And I had a conversation with someone high up in addition to his work at Axios. Barak is also the Washington correspondent for Channel 12 News, which is the big news channel in Israel. And I had a conversation with one of the top executives in your channel in the beginning of this war. And I said to him, I think you're doing a mistake not showing Israelis the images of what's happening in Gaza. Because we're not seeing it on the evening news. Now more, but back then not at all. And the answer to me was, well, we have our victims and our soldiers and our hostages and our bereaved families and our evacuees and our destruction. And I said, well, the argument is we need to understand what this war is doing in this other dimension that we're now talking about, because it's important for Israelis to understand what we have been dragged into, where this is going. And to your point about Yahya Sinwar's greatest victory, I'll tell you what I think is his greatest victory. We're 2 years into this war. It continues. It's dragging on. He who committed the massacre of October 7th, in just a couple of weeks at the United Nations General Assembly, which I know you'll be covering, they're about you have states in Europe, France, potentially the Brits, Belgium, Spain, Australia, others, I don't know however many there are right now, who are about to announce and recognize the Palestinian state. He's still got 48 hostages. He's got the IDF still operating in Gaza. He's going to get a Palestinian state. The world has turned on Israel. Israel is more isolated than ever before. Is he losing the war? So you would say, well, he's lost 60,000 of his people, 15,000, 20,000 are terrorists. We don't know the number. But 40,000 people have been killed? They don't care. For them, this is a victory so far.
Before I open the floor for questions, I want to go and ask you something on a more personal level, because in the book also has a chapter that goes into policy recommendations, and it feels to me after reading it that it's itching you in your fingertips to move from the journalism world where you're the guy with your ear on the keyhole outside of the room trying to figure out what's going on inside, to be the guy inside the room?
Not for me.
Not for you?
Not for me. No, I don't have the thick enough skin for politics. It's not for me. I wish. I'll tell you what I do think needs to happen in Israel, though. In my opinion, the fact that this government is still in office is a travesty, in my view. Correct. The military leadership has been purged, as it should have been, by the people who were responsible for October 7th. At the conference that you'll be at tomorrow, we have the head of the Shin Bet, who stepped down a month ago, Ronen Bar, will be one of our speakers in his first appearance. But he was the guy who on the night of between October 6th and October 7th, for the most part, they missed the intelligence. And, I'm always reminded by the famous statement or saying by Donald Rumsfeld, it wasn't a lack of information, it was a lack of imagination. That's, for the most part, what happened to Israel. But the Israeli military leadership gone. Herzl Halevi, the chief of staff, Khalifa, you mentioned, the head of the military intelligence, Finkelman, the head of the Southern Command, and so much more, all replaced, which is it should have, because they failed. But this government, which failed, hangs on. This prime minister that failed clings on. I would hope and want to see new leadership come in. And I want to see young leadership come in. But as much as I'm flattered, it's not for me.
and if there's a new prime minister in Israel in a year and he tells you, Yaakov, I want you to be the Israeli ambassador to Washington, you're going to tell him, no, it's not for me, I'm writing books.
I'll say I got to ask Barak, and then I'll get back to you.
All right, we'll open the floor for questions. Whoever has a question, I see that there's already a queue, so just do it.
It sounds like a fantastic book.
But just if you can make it brief so that everybody will have a chance.
First, I should say, when you say in Israel, they just don't see it, it's because they don't want to see it. That's what the Germans said. Oh, we didn't see anything. Mm-hmm. My question, one more thing, and that is that I wrote a piece about this in 2020. It was called Hubris, and I predicted something like this would happen, or I speculated. It never occurred to me that it would come out like this. My name is Caroline Poplin. It's on Medium. My question is, can Israel survive this in today's world? It is becoming a pariah state. Herzl said anti-Semitism is forever, and you can't defeat it, you can only avoid it. And we are running right into it.
First of all, I completely reject the comparison between the Israeli people and the German people.
Okay.
I think it's wrong. I don't think Israel instigated this war. And I think that it's a false equivalence and it's a wrong equivalence. And moral clarity in times of conflict is important. Number two is definitely there was hubris here. There was arrogance. By the way, the October 7th, the attack took place 50 years plus 1 day on the Gregorian calendar to the invasion by Egypt and Syria on Yom Kippur, in the Yom Kippur War of 1973. And it was on that day, Israel, the Jewish people's holiest day, that they launched that surprise attack. And it was Israel's last bloodiest debacle and a war that took us completely by surprise, and was also grew out of a hubris and an arrogance that we had in the wake of the Six-Day War, which was a miraculous victory. Although, as Trump, I think, said, 12-day war is 2 times better than the Six-Day War, right? The one against Iran. With that said, I think that the Israeli people and the Israeli leadership has that great challenge now, is how not to fall back into that trap 100%. But I'll also say something about anti-Semitism for a moment, because you did bring it up. There's something very strange, and I recognize I don't live here anymore. I used to. But I do spend a lot of time in the United States. My parents are here. I have a lot of family here. I think it's interesting how on October 7th, you had places across this country where before it was even sundown in America, as Hamas was still massacring people in Israel, or had just finished because the Israelis were fighting back, there were already people taking to the streets, calling Israel genocidal, a terrorist regime, and how it is that when people saw Israelis and Jews murdered, every anti-Semite came out of the woodwork.
That's right.
And saw this as an opportunity to celebrate.
That's right.
So is anti-Semitism a result of Israeli policy?
No.
To some extent sometimes, but is anti-Semitism there, deeply entrenched and embedded, unfortunately, in parts of this country and in parts definitely of Europe and other places? 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're only making it worse.
Yeah, you know, I'm probably the only Palestinian in this room. And, you know, you talk about traumatized people. Yeah, I'm the only Palestinian in this room, I think. I came to the States as a 5-year-old kid from Palestine. And, you know, the Israeli people are traumatized. The Palestinian people are traumatized and severely traumatized. You know, I'm just going to make a small statement. I'm going to ask the question. You know, we all have our narratives. We all have displacement. We all have identity. We all have our attachments. And we're all human beings. We're all human beings. And, you know, to me, I was a big Oslo supporter. I was at the White House clapping. Yes, it's over. We have history pieces at hand. It's over and it's over. I witnessed occupation for the first time in 1975. I went to study Arabic. 1967, I had just finished my freshman year in high school. 58 years later, you still have a harsh occupation in the West Bank. That question is coming. I have to put it. But because you're talking about people, when they wake up every morning, my relatives woke up every morning. Shh, watch out, the kids are going to spy on you. Shh, watch out, you got this. You have border control, daily humiliation for 58 years. That's a fact of life. So you have to, you know, so everyone has it. But my point of view, all that being said, we're all human beings. We all have to live together. No one is going anywhere. So the next war, we don't want another war. You have to come up with a resolution. There is no military resolution to this. It's only a political thing. And people have to live together. If you start saying, we're going to outsmart you, or you're going to outsmart me, we're not going nowhere. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I couldn't agree more that this war needs to end with a political resolution. My greatest criticism of this war and the way it's been managed is the fact that the Israeli government refuses to articulate and outline how does this war end? It was Clausewitz who said famously, who wrote that the great Prussian military theorist, that war is a means towards a political resolution. We need the political resolution. It's not kill more Hamas guys, collect more AK-47s, destroy more tunnels. We're not going to kill the idea out of people. What we need is a new governing entity that can take over Gaza, rule it. I would also argue that we need a de-radicalization process to take place because we need to change the education system, the cultural system, the establishment within those places so kids are no longer taught to want to kill Israelis. You might say we need some de-radicalization in Israel too. Also possible. But what I also think is that, unfortunately, what October 7th did, and to your point of the occupation and the need for a resolution, October 7th, tragically, in my view, has set us back dramatically. Now, it's an opportunity to rebuild and to do this de-radicalization, to be able to be on a track towards a better future, but it will take time.
No, but Yaakov, I want to follow up on this because in the recommendations, you talk about structural changes in the intelligence services, about the relations with the U.S., about public diplomacy, okay, and all of that under the headline of how would this not happen again? But you don't say anything about how do we not make sure that in the next war we'll be ready, but how do we prevent the next war? How do we make peace? You didn't touch that. Was that intentional?
We didn't go down the route of what is the right diplomatic process forward for Israel. And I think that part of it was intentional. It comes from a place of where right now it doesn't seem like it's on the horizon. And personally, I feel that this has to be that turning point for us to embark on that process. But it will take a very long time. It will take a generation. We need a generational change. We need one in the Gaza Strip, definitely. And we need it also in Israel, for Israelis to once again believe that peace is possible. Because those people, by the way, I don't know where the person who made the comment is right now, but you were at the White House. I moved to Israel in the summer of 1993. And in September of 93, I watched the signing of the Oslo Accords with Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat and Bill Clinton. I was in high school. And I said to myself, I said, wow, I came to this country now. I was brought there by my parents at the time. I came to this country now at a time that it's going into a process of peace. This is an amazing, even as a kid, I thought this was an amazing new horizon, new era. Within 2 years, I couldn't take buses to school anymore because in Jerusalem, they were blowing up. That 18 bus that I would take to school was being blown up by Hamas, unfortunately, once every few weeks. And that set us back also back then. So there's always going to be people. We're not going to prosecute the history right now. But no, I'm 100%. There were Israelis against it. There's Palestinians against it. The people today are broken to the point that they do not believe that peace is possible. And this war, if it ends in a way that we don't set ourselves in a path forward that gives us a belief that we can maybe get there one day, we will have made even a bigger mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I want to keep going on thinking about the trauma and the depth of the trauma. In a sense, what you just talked about shows about the depth of the trauma of even coming before October 7th and how much peace has kind of been right there and then lost. And now here we are with this huge renewal of trauma to the very depths of our being. Now, out of the trauma of the Holocaust, there was a little hope because there was Israel. Where do you see? And I don't think just political change is it. Where do you see where we need to go so that we restructure and do that, but also speak to people's deep needs?
I mean, look, it's tough to find that hope at a time when the war drags on, the hostages are still in Gaza, the death toll in Gaza climbs, and we're on the brink, potentially, or the eve of a large-scale offensive into Gaza City to put more pressure on Hamas and to potentially try to get them to release the hostages and to make a deal. And we have Donald Trump, and Barak reports this all the time. Is there going to be a deal? He wants a deal. The negotiators are supposed to fly off to Doha sometime later this week, et cetera. I think that it will come from political leadership, but I think it has to come from the bottom up. For too long, we tried these top-down paradigms of peace that failed the people miserably. Failed the Palestinian people, it failed the Israeli people. And it's time for us to recognize that we need more of these interactions, more of getting together, more coexistence, more of the de-radicalization, of learning to live alongside one another. I'll tell you, for example, this is not the Palestinians, but I find optimism in how Israeli, Jewish, and Arab relations for Israeli citizens has been quite good over the last 2 years. We had a Gaza operation in May of 2021, and there were riots in all the mixed cities across Israel. Very violent riots. People lost their lives. Arabs were rioting. Jews eventually were rioting. And in this war, the Israeli Arabs have not rioted even once. And that shows me that there's an opportunity. Those are 2 million people, citizens of our country. There's an opportunity for greater coexistence. We could replicate that to other places. We have to do it better in our country, and we could do it also with the Palestinians. But we need leadership that believes in that, and right now we have there's no leadership on either side that believes in it. We need people to believe in it once again. Because also, here's the hard truth. Show me a politician who does something just because it's the right thing. There aren't many today, right? Especially in today's world. The people aren't demanding it, right? The Israeli people aren't going out to the streets and say, we need to make peace with the Palestinians. So if the Israeli people aren't asking it of their leaders, then why would their leaders take the brave steps to go towards it?
Yes.
Is it okay if I ask two?
If you ask what?
2 questions?
Yeah, short ones.
I think we're just at the clock, so
I'll try to make
it
them
quick.
short. First, specifically on the military question, you say the reason why Israel was underprepared for October 7th was because they had a false sense of security, they undervalued human intelligence, even though, as we saw in Iran, they're capable of doing that. They overvalued underground tunnels while undervaluing the overland routes. I'm sure all of those answers are true, but I'm still I want the answer behind the answer. Like, why did Israel make all of those mistakes?
Well, I think that comes back to this belief in what we were talking about, in this policy of containment, in this belief that Hamas could be deterred, in the belief that they were more interested in economic prosperity and economic development, and therefore, and that you had them controlled. You had the border fence, you had the Iron Dome, you had forces along the border. You believed that you had it under control, when Israel, in fact, did not. So that belief creates the mistakes. When you look at everything through a certain prism, then even your intelligence that's coming. And by the way, in the night between October 6th and October 7th, the alarm bells were ringing. Right? There were signs that something was happening, but Israel was, again, it's that lack of imagination. It wasn't able to put the pieces together because it was being looked at through this prism of Hamas is deterred. Hamas does not want conflict. So why would they be doing this? It must be a drill. Everything was looked at in the wrong way. How are we on time?
I think we're let's just do the last one and then.
Thank you. One quick statement. I worked at Bill Clinton's White House during the Camp David Accords, and I was invited to hear President Clinton after the Camp David Accords came back, and how he went through it laboriously, how he bent over backwards to give Arafat whatever he wanted, and Arafat continued to say no. And that the point is here, that was repeated several years later when Bush came in and Rice and Abbas, and the same thing rejected. It seems that the onus is always on Israel. Israel has wanted peace, but it's the so-called Palestinians who don't want peace. They've been radicalized. If there's any way that peace can come, Israel should be entitled to win the war. And the war is only after the war is won, either that Hamas is defeated or they surrender. My question, is that the time that peace can be made?
I appreciate the comment. And I think that there's no question in my mind that we do need a victory in this war. But the victory in the war also has to create a better horizon for both peoples. And I think we both have suffered with faulty leadership in recent years. And this is an opportunity for that to change. I want to thank you all very much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you to Barak.
Thank you.
3 words.